The emergency session of the Galactic Mediation Council had been called at 300 Standard Time, which meant the situation on Xeris 7 had moved beyond critical into catastrophic. Ambassador Velnara of the Centauri Collective stood before the assembled representatives, her usually composed demeanor cracking like ice under pressure. "The Corvani Liberation Front has seized the capital," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of desperation. 3 million civilians trapped. The planetary government has collapsed. We need peacekeepers, experienced, professional soldiers who understand the delicate nature of civilian extraction and conflict de-escalation. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as delegates consulted their datapads. Most civilized worlds maintained small, well-trained peacekeeping forces specializing in non-lethal intervention and diplomatic resolution. It was how advanced societies handled conflicts with precision, restraint, and minimal collateral damage. The Aquarian delegate raised a webbed hand. "Our forces are committed to the Sigma Epsilon crisis. We cannot spare." "Mine as well," interrupted the vegan representative. "Perhaps the Terran colonies. They have been seeking integration into galactic affairs." A pause settled over the chamber. Earth and its colonies were still relatively new to the galactic community, barely 50 years since first contact. Most delegates knew little about human military doctrine beyond basic reports. "The humans do have a significant military presence on Kepler 442b, Velnara said, consulting her files. "Their colonial defense force appears substantial." What she didn't mention, what none of them knew, was that Kepler 442b wasn't just any human colony. In the databases, it was listed simply as High G Agricultural World, Hazard Level 7. The reports glossed over the details: gravity nearly 3 times galactic standard, atmospheric pressure that would crush most beings, storms that hurled kilometer-wide debris across continents, and native predators that made legends seem quaint. To the humans who called it home, it was just Tuesday. Captain Marcus Chen of the 3RD Kepler Defense Battalion received the peacekeeping request while his unit was conducting routine training exercises. Routine on Kepler 442b meant teaching new recruits how to survive in a Category 5 acid storm while being hunted by metallic pack hunters whose claws could tear through titanium. Peacekeeping mission? Chen read the brief twice, then showed it to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Sarah Okafor. "Says here, they need gentle intervention and minimal force application." Okafor, who had once punched through a bunker wall to retrieve wounded civilians during a storm, raised an eyebrow. "That's what they want." "That's what they're getting," Chen replied, already drafting deployment orders. "Load standard gear. We'll keep the peace." What the Galactic Council didn't understand was that standard gear for Kepler 442b included powered exoskeletons rated for construction work, weapons designed to stop creatures that use starship hulls as scratching posts, and armor that could withstand being stepped on by 100-ton animals. To the Kepler Defense Battalion, it was peacekeeping equipment. After all, they weren't trying to start a war, just end one quickly. The KDF destroyer Ironclad dropped out of hyperspace above Xeris 718 hours after deployment. To the Corvani rebels monitoring orbital traffic, it looked less like a peacekeeping vessel and more like something designed to survive ramming attacks from space whales. Which, coincidentally, it was. "This is Captain Chen of the Terran Colonial Defense Force." His transmission reached both the rebels and the planetary government. "We're here to restore order. Please stand down and prepare for pacification protocols." The rebel commander, a grizzled Xerisan veteran named Thork, laughed when he heard the message. Humans? The galaxy's newest members, sending a single ship against his army of 50,000. It would be a slaughter. He was right about the slaughter. He was wrong about who would be doing the dying. The first indication that something was different came when the human dropships entered atmosphere. Instead of the usual sleek vessels designed for stealth insertions, these were blunt, armored boxes that hit the ground like meteors and kept functioning. The rebels fired everything they had: plasma cannons, antimatter charges, even commandeered orbital defense platforms. The dropships opened their doors, and the humans walked out. Sergeant Rebecca Torres emerged from the smoke and debris, her exoskeleton barely registering the impacts from small arms fire. To her, the rebel weapons felt like a gentle rain, less forceful than the hail on her homeworld. She'd been in storms where individual hailstones hit harder than these plasma bolts. "Sector 7, start your sweep," she called over the comm, her voice calm, despite standing in what the rebels considered a killing field. "Remember, minimal force. We're peacekeepers." What followed wasn't a battle. It was a natural disaster with military precision. The humans didn't take cover. They walked through crossfire like it was inconvenient weather. They didn't return massive volumes of fire. They fired single, perfectly placed shots that ended resistance immediately. When rebels tried to fortify positions, the humans simply walked through the walls. The Corvani Liberation Front had prepared for war against other civilized species beings who valued their lives, who took reasonable precautions, who understood that some positions were impregnable. They hadn't prepared for soldiers who treated their battle lines like speed bumps. Within 6 hours, the capital city was pacified. The rebels, who survived roughly 8% of the original force, surrendered en masse when they realized their weapons were essentially useless, and their fortifications were suggestions rather than barriers. Captain Chen filed his after-action report with characteristic efficiency. Mission accomplished. Corvani Liberation Front disbanded. Hostile forces neutralized. Civilian casualties, 0. Infrastructure damage, minimal. Peace restored to X-Series 7. Recommend follow-up diplomatic mission for long-term stability. What he didn't mention in the formal report was the state of the rebel leadership. Thork, the commander who had laughed at human involvement, was found curled in a supply closet, whimpering about demons in metal skin and weapons that eat starships. The aftermath came swiftly. Galactic news networks struggled to comprehend what had happened. The Corvani Liberation Front, a movement that had resisted 3 peacekeeping forces over 2 years, had been eliminated in a single day by what the reports called a small colonial militia. Ambassador Velnara requested an emergency debriefing with Captain Chen. She met him in the capital's main plaza, where human soldiers were distributing food to civilian refugees and conducting what they called community outreach. She watched a human medic without any protective gear casually treating injuries that would require hazmat protocols for most species. The medic's bare hands were working with caustic Xerison blood like it was water. "Captain," Velnara began carefully, "your methods were effective, but perhaps more aggressive than we anticipated." Chen looked genuinely confused. "Ma'am, we used minimal force protocols throughout the operation. Standard non-lethal pacification techniques." "Non-lethal?" She gestured to reports of vaporized bunkers and rebel forces found liquefied inside their own armor. "Nobody died who didn't refuse our surrender requests," Chen replied matter-of-factly. "We gave everyone multiple chances to stand down. That's standard peacekeeping doctrine, right?" Velnara realized, with growing horror, that the humans genuinely believed they had conducted a gentle, restrained operation. This was their idea of minimal force. "Captain," she asked quietly, "what would maximum force look like?" Chen considered this for a moment. "Well, we'd probably have to call in the heavy infantry. Maybe bring some of the siege equipment." He paused. "Though honestly, for a job this small, we'd probably just send the Marines. They're better at precision work." As Velnara struggled to process the implications, she noticed something else. The human soldiers weren't occupying the city, they were rebuilding it. with their bare hands. Structures that should have taken construction crews weeks to repair were being fixed in hours by soldiers who treated 50-ton concrete slabs like building blocks. The civilians, initially terrified, were beginning to approach the humans with something approaching worship. These beings had ended a 2-year siege in 6 hours, caused no civilian casualties, and were now fixing everything the war had broken. To the people of Series 7, the humans weren't conquerors or even peacekeepers. They were miracle workers. The final report to the Galactic Council was filed under Peacekeeping Mission, Complete Success. The rebellion was ended, the planet was stable, and civilian casualties were indeed 0. What the report didn't capture was the fundamental shift in galactic politics that followed. Within a week, 17 different worlds had submitted formal requests for human-style peacekeeping assistance. The requests cited the remarkably efficient and humanitarian intervention on Series 7. The Galactic Council faced a new reality. They had asked for peacekeepers, and the Deathworlders had delivered exactly what they asked for. The ruin they brought wasn't to the civilians or the cities. It was to the very concept that some conflicts were too complex for simple solutions. As Captain Chen put it in his personal log, turns out most problems are pretty easy to solve when you're not afraid of them. Who knew? The galaxy was still trying to figure out the answer to that question.